Spectre Vision Radio.
What color is the dress? What do you see? The rabbit or the duck? Two people leaning in for a kiss? Or the vase in between them? I never thought it mattered. But these days I find myself wondering why I can never see the vase. I wonder why it's so hard for me to see through different eyes. I got obsessed with film when I was a lonely teenager. It was at the time when my compulsion first manifested. I wasn't given a diagnosis. It was just seen as vandalism, adolescent rebellion. When I was asked why I set fire to the trash can in the school cafeteria, or why I burned holes in furniture, no adult would accept the simple truth that I just couldn't help myself. I was forced to spend long weeks grounded in my bedroom, forbidden from going out to see my friends. I passed the time in bed, trying not to obsess about where my mother kept her lighter, or whether my parents had remembered to toss out the matchsticks they kept on the mantel downstairs. I would spend the rest of my time watching movies, one after the other, day after day, until the VHS tapes got worn out, and the scenes would shimmer and flicker, almost as if ready to burst into flames themselves. I especially liked action movies. I would watch the explosions over and over again. I'd hold my breath for every ticking clock on every detonator, and then stare in a trance as gold and orange and yellow ballooned and rioted on the screen. As I got older, I never really learned to keep my desires in check. I only learned to manage them, to keep the flames contained in my fantasies, rather than make them a reality. But that all changed when things took a bad turn. Work let me go. My relationship ended. I was desperate to set something aflame. I wanted to watch something blacken into ashes or melt until it was contorted out of shape. I hoped that movies would once again be an outlet for my obsessions. Seeing explosions on a screen in a theater would be the closest I could get to witnessing a real wall of flames, it seemed to me. But modern cinema was no help. I went to the independent theaters and the giant multiplexes, but none of the fires, none of the explosions were real. They didn't feed me like they should. It was all pixels, perfect and pristine, with none of the intricacies or unpredictabilities of true flame. I spent entire days in theaters, trying to feed my hunger. Everything in front of me burned, but nothing caught fire. I got more and more restless. My imagination started to dress all my surroundings in garments of hellfire. And then, just as it was getting unbearable, I heard about a film. The movie had not been given a wide release, and it wasn't available on streaming sites either. Instead, it seemed to be touring cities, like film prints did in the old days. It had been made outside any studio system. It was too dangerous, according to the message boards. "This movie has everything," the post said. "It's whatever you bring to it." I couldn't find a coherent plot synopsis. Discussions about the film devolved into strange threads which seemed incomprehensible to someone who hadn't seen it yet. But I could sense the devotion the film inspired. Everyone seemed to say that it harkened back to the films of old, to the era of VHS tapes and video store rentals, and the heyday of 80s maximalism. More than anything, though, it was the poster which enticed me. A simple image of black, with veins of blood running across it, and flames licking at its edges. My anticipation started to increase. Maybe, I thought, this would be the one. That one great film, made like they used to make them. Maybe it would give me the feeling the tapes from my childhood had. I checked theater listings daily, wondering when the film would play. I waited for months. And then, finally, I saw the title come up on an internet search. It was playing at a theater I'd never heard of, on the other side of town. I headed out, taking a bus I'd never taken before. It brought me to an area I'd never visited. It was downtrodden, like the whole neighborhood had been trampled and forgotten about. The theater was old, but not in an endearing way. There was a ticket booth in a bubble on the outside, like the theaters of yesteryear, but cracks adorned the glass, fracturing the vision of an elderly man selling admissions. There were old posters in the corridor leading inside, but they were lined with graffiti, and not the artistic kind. I entered the theater. It was small and dusty. The seats had once been velvet red, but now were faded and torn, the smell of cigarette smoke embedded into the fabric. There were a handful of other patrons, also by themselves. I didn't like the look of them. Or, at least, I didn't like how they made me look at myself. They were fidgety and nervous, tapping their shoes, blinking furiously. There was no checking of phones, no polite conversation, just anticipation. I wondered what this film could give them. I wondered how it could possibly fulfill all our desires. And then those words came back to me. The movie is whatever you bring to it. The dusty curtains did a crooked sachet and withdrew, revealing a screen which was lopsided and spotted with stains of dirt and dead insects. A projector whirred into life behind us, and a cocoon of blue light appeared in the air above our heads. There were no trailers, no commercials, no introduction. Just like that, the film began. It jittered and sputtered like it had been made in a different era. The sound looped in and out, sometimes loud and deafening, sometimes muffled and dead. The story was, for a few scenes, disarmingly simple. It played out like an ordinary drama, depicting the fraught dynamics of a family. But then, the film stopped making sense at all. I couldn't tell what was happening anymore. The images careened and spun. A man sitting in the row in front of me leaned in at that point, grabbing the seat in front of him in anticipation. Suddenly the screen depicted gas, and soldiers wearing gas masks. And then the soldiers and gas masks were melting together, hybrid figures floundering around on battlefields, shrieking, laughing, convulsing. The man in front of me took it all in, and then fell back into his seat with a soft sigh, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this. The film sputtered again like a reel had fallen out of the projector, and then dove into another dreamscape. This one was set inside a hotel room. The scene was in monochrome colors, like a perfume commercial. A beautiful couple rolled around in bedsheets, made eyes at each other, kissed each other. But every time they touched, the skin which made contact hardened like dry earth, solidifying into a crust. Then, finally, those areas of skin turned to stone, snapping off and filling the bed with dust. But still the couple did not stop. Even as entire limbs calcified and dropped off their bodies, even as entire sections of their being cascaded into rubble. I turned around in my seat. Some of the audience, like me, were baffled by this strange erotica? Is that what it was? But one man behind me was crying. His gaze was so fixed, so unwavering, that I felt like I could see the entire screen in the watery reflection of his eyes. The film shuddered once more. And then it came. What I'd been looking for. It was a house, wallpapered with fire. Every door frame, every window, was embroidered with flame. The camera focused on the house for a moment, as the building belched fire out of every orifice, shooting plumes of red into a night sky. Then the camera prowled inside, undaunted by the blaze. People think fire is quiet. It's anything but. Every flame is a voice, and every fire is a choir, In a blaze this big, fire roars. When it makes stairs and doors collapse, it's like hearing the bones of giants breaking. The sound filled the theater, pinning me to my seat. This was the real thing. Sheets upon sheets of real, unmanaged hellfire. It was almost too much for me. I couldn't move. I didn't dare close my eyes. All I wanted to do was take in every lick of orange and gold on the screen. It was like the film was no film at all, like I was peering out of my own existence and into a terrifying, delicious hell. Satisfaction. No, some kind of ecstasy blazed through me, embraced me. Then, through the smoke and the fire, emerged a figure, silhouetted against flame. It was a man. He was limping, and his arms dangled as if unconnected to the muscles in his body. His clothes were in tatters, and one sleeve of his shirt seemed to be on fire. The figure slumped toward the camera. I couldn't really make out his features, but I could see that half of his face was gone. I could see parts of his flesh, which would normally be veiled in skin. He peered out from the screen, muttering something unintelligible. He seemed to be looking straight at me, imploring. I recognized something in his eyes, something pleading, a begging desire to be saved, to be understood. I saw kinship. The film shuddered onto something else, but I had no desire to pay attention. Though I didn't really understand what I'd felt when that blackened, burned man had seemingly been reaching out for me. It wasn't enough to pull me from my reverie. I just wanted to bathe in the memory of the flames. The film stopped, as abruptly as it had started, spluttering to an end. We all remained in our seats. I, like everyone else I'm sure, wanted to stay for a while before returning to the real world. I don't remember getting home. The images had seared themselves into my mind. I barely looked at where I was going. All that mattered was that feeling, the rush of heat, the blaze of inferno. For the next few days, nothing mattered aside from that film. Only the film itself didn't seem to exist anymore. I went back to the theater, but it was closed. It had been closed for years, a passerby informed me. The message board posts which had intrigued me so still made no sense, but they bore no resemblance to what I had seen. The posts seemed to be referring to another film entirely. They didn't mention flames, or the gas masks, or the lovers turning to stone. It was as if what I had watched had been tailor-made for the people in that particular theater, and had not been shown to anyone else. I started to think of the movie as a dream. Indeed, my actual dreams were now just the film, playing over and over. I was satiated, for a while, but that smell of smoke, that oven of heat, that tribe of flames, I had to have more. With no opportunity to see the film again, there was only one thing to do. I had to set fire to something, just for a moment, just for one night. It would be the last time, I told myself. One blaze of glory, to purge all my pent-up feelings before I moved on. After this time, I would get another job, try to meet someone new. From the ashes of my past, I would begin again. Once I made my decision, my old habits came back easily, like they'd never left. I waited till late. I then took the last bus to the outskirts of the city, arriving at my destination in the dead of night. The streets were dark and black, lined with overgrown front lawns, broken windows, and never repaired streetlights. No one would miss anything here. The film had reminded me of one house in particular. I remembered it from my childhood, when I lived in that very neighborhood, in the times before the area got quite so bad. It was a large building, now completely abandoned. It had been boarded up, but even the boards were falling off now. This was no one's home, and hadn't been for a long time. I clambered inside, into the rooms littered with broken glass and etched with cobwebs. I doused everything with fuel, emptying canisters into the cracks between the floorboards and the holes in the walls. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I lit a fire. Just the hiss of the newly lit match was enough to get my heart racing. I knew it was wrong, and yet it felt the opposite. I dropped the match, and the world around me writhed into life. Flames pooled on the floor. They climbed into the crevices. Shooting tongues of fire began to lap at my feet. Black smoke retched out from the walls, leaping down my throat. It was only when the heat was overpowering, when it felt like my flesh would combust, when it felt like my clothes were melting into my skin, that I finally decided to leave. I threaded my way through the flames and over to the window to clamber back out. But when I went to put my hand through the open window and hoist myself through, I realized there was something in the way. Some kind of translucent skin stretching over the window, barring me from exiting. I pushed into that strange, dirty barrier, noticing now the unusual spots on its surface, its blemishes and stains. I tried to pry a hole into that bizarre epidermis with my fingernails, but it resisted. No matter how far I stretched it, it tightened back into place. Panic rose up within me. I rushed to another window. It also had that sheen, that membrane cocooning me in with the fire. I started to cough, my lungs filling with black, poisonous fumes. I stumbled from one room to the next, swimming through the smoke. But I could hardly see. I could barely open my eyes anymore. There was the sound of 100 bones breaking, and then a section of the ceiling collapsed, beams of wood and fire raining down on me from above. Something seared into the side of my forehead, and I screamed as I dropped to the floor. I put out my arms and tried to shove the flaming debris away from me, no matter the cost to my hands. But it was too late. Scorching pain wrenched through the side of my head. It was a stinging agony like I'd never felt before. I screamed as I leapt to my feet to get away from the fire on the floor, and continued to shout as I cradled my face, my senses obscured by pain. Everything went black for a moment. All that existed was that abject misery. But through the torment, through the agony, understanding finally came. I lurched back to the nearest window and peered out. The lair was there, that strange barrier, blocking my way out. But I now knew what it was. It wasn't a membrane, not a skin. It was a screen. And outside the house was a theater, where men sat in old, faded seats. One of them was me, watching the flames on the screen. There was no concern in his eyes, no fear, only breathless excitement and release. Our eyes met. I tried to shout and plead. I tried to communicate with my other self, as if there was some way he could hear me, but there was no change in his expression. The more I cried, the more I begged, the more enraptured he seemed. And then, the blackness finally took me. The world was never the same for me after that. I was rescued by the fire department, but I remained that figure I first saw on the screen when I went to the theater. The man in the inferno, who somehow just about lived to tell the tale. But explaining what happened to me, that would require someone to listen, someone to understand, someone to believe me when I say that through every door, through every window, I see movie theaters. I see portals into dark rooms with excited, breathless men staring at me, the other side of a dirty veil. I can't take it. I would rather blur them out with fire. And that's what my mind does. My imagination overcoats the sights of those theaters with flames. Sometimes, before I can block the side of the theater out, I think I see myself in the seats again. We look at each other through the screen, a veil with desire on one side and desperation on the other. In my gut, I know there will be no end. I just hope that one day, when I open a door and see that theater, that someone else sees it too, sees the festival of embers, sees the blaze of hellfire, and then sees those men in the stalls beyond, lapping it all up. I hope that one day, someone will see the world through my eyes, even just for a minute, because then I wouldn't be so alone.